Welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Christina Rodenbeck. Welcome, Christina.
Hi.
Christina, you're doing a talk at the Astrology Lodge, and it's possibly one of my favorite myth stories about Psyche and Eros. So I thought I'd look and see what this interest is with the ideal relationships. And lo and behold, what do I find? I find a seventh house packed with planets in Pisces. Tell us a little bit about that, because you've got the Sun, Saturn, Chiron, and Mars all in Pisces in the seventh house. You do have Mercury in Pisces, but it's sitting in the eighth. So I was more interested in what's actually going on in the seventh. What's your experience of living with that?
Well, it's so strange to talk about myself. I'm so used to talking about other people's charts that I find myself stunned for a moment, like a rabbit in the headlights, having to talk about my own chart. Also, if you add big asteroids, I've also got Pallas, Athena, and Juno in there also. So I've got a very full seventh house. My experience is that relationships are how I have grown through one-to-one relationships. I'm much better. I like one-to-one stuff. I think that as an astrologer, I spend a lot of time talking to people one-to-one. So it's very beneficial. I've had a lot of very different experiences with those one-to-one relationships. And the difficulty is, I would say, with having a packed seventh house is finding yourself, because my son is also in the seventh house. So I have been in the past inclined to allow myself to be given away, or my identity to get lost in the other person. I've always considered it fortunate, not always, but of late, really. I think it's quite fortunate as a Pisces, like say a super Pisces, frankly, a very Pisces person, because all those planets are also aspected by Neptune. I'm sure you noticed that as well. So it's not just that I have all these planets in Pisces, but they're all aspected by Neptune. I've become grateful as I got older to have that Sun Saturn conjunction, because it holds the whole thing together much more. It's helped me a lot in the long run to become sort of, the master of myself, so to speak.
Do you feel that having Saturn conjunct the Sun, it gives you a little bit more discrimination as a Pisces, so that you're questioning more and not just accepting everything in terms of the ideal, the fairy tale?
I love fairy tales, and I love storytelling, and I love cinema. And I love to lose myself in the world of fantasy. But I think the Saturn is very discriminating in that it gives you boundaries. So I know perfectly well when I'm fantasizing. And I always have. I've always had an incredibly rich fantasy life and dream life, but it's generally been that. I did have a horrible Saturn return. That was really disastrous. And it was, because Saturn in Pisces itself is a weird placement. That's also, I've had other astrologers look at this chart and go, oh God, this is one of the worst charts I've ever seen. In fact, I had people say that, or the most difficult charts. And it's good to have a difficult chart as an astrologer, because it means that you know what hard is, and that it's possible that you're not a slave to your chart, right? Your chart's there to be worked with.
No, that's right. I don't know. I think I find it very interesting because you've got Saturn in Pisces and you've got so much Pisces. I was wondering whether Saturn ever felt like he was drowning, in all that water, and whether perhaps it might be difficult for you to have, for Saturn to get a word in amongst all the nebulous stuff, and yet desperately needing that, because it's like you said, the boundaries. So then Saturn can act like an anchor in the chart. But I'm also playing with a different take on it, which would be, I wonder if it means that actually this is exactly what you're meant to be working at, is the Pisces stuff without losing the boundaries. So I'm kind of turning it upside down as well, because there has to be a reason as to why you were born with such a stellium in Pisces. And so it must mean that you're meant to be developing this Piscean thing. And now I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about the Neptune aspects. And of course, the South Node also being in Scorpio involved in this. And so I'm thinking of it as a progression of water from Scorpio to Pisces. So you've got all the angst and rage of Scorpio being tempered, hopefully, by something that is about letting go, and it's about acceptance and forgiveness, which then it makes sense to have all of that Pisces and Saturn there going, oh yeah, and by the way, this is what you're going to work at. And might I add, it's the area of relationships where you're going to do all of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, I can say quite bluntly that there's a very easy real life aspect to this, to all that water and the Saturn drowning and Neptune near the IC, which is that my dad was an alcoholic. That's just it's very straightforward astrology, but a very imaginative and poetic mind. And so that has, that's been a big influence in my life.
Indeed, it would.
And, and it's a big, there is a lot of forgiveness that has to be done, not just for me and my family, but, that's what Pisces is about. It's about forgiveness and kindness. I'm trying to, trying to be kind in a constructive way, or forgiving in a constructive way, rather than just being like, because Pisces can be very victim-y. You can end up playing the sort of victim role, which I don't think Saturn really is going to ever let me do, but it can be. And I think that, that life moving towards forgiveness and towards letting go is, for me anyway, has been really beautiful, actually. But it takes time. I mean, this is the other thing about the Saturn Sun conjunction, is that, you might look at that and think that this person might have had to, there were aspects of my life where I grew up quite early, but actually it's taken me a long time. For me, life is long, and my career is long, and getting to a place of safety took me a long time.
Yes, I imagine so. That lunar axis is never an easy one, of Scorpio to Taurus, and but I felt that the Pisces was the route by which you could get to that, those green pastures of Taurus that are so promised in that North Node. And we were talking about relationships being a means by which you would do that. But I think as well, oh gosh, and of course there's echoes of this with Mercury and Pisces in the 8th as well, saying, you are going to look at the darker side, but you're going to with compassion and that's as you said, can be a very beautiful thing. But I also, we were talking about one-to-one relationships, but of course your career plays a part in this too, because that North Node is not far off the, the MC. It's just 2 degrees into the 10th house. So what role do you feel that your career plays in this? Because on top of that, of course, we've got a whole different scheme going on here with the moon conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini, communication, teaching, all of that kind of thing. And of course, in the 10th, dealing with the public too. So how has that played into this healing that we've been talking about?
Well, I mean, the North Node in Taurus at 28 degrees. It's interesting, actually. I've seen quite a few other astrologers with that, weirdly enough. And it's ruled by Venus, of course, which again is about relationships. Venus at 1 Aquarius, also in the place of like the job. So it all ties together. I mean, my job is talking to people one-to-one most of the time. That's what I do. And my job is to be a healer, is to heal them, or at least attempt to help people to heal themselves. It's to be compassionate, to listen, and to talk a lot as well. I mean, that's what's so the big difference between astrology and therapy is that the astrologer talks a lot. But which brings me to the Jupiter moon in Gemini. I like to talk, and I like other people. That stellium in the 7th, I like other people. I'm interested in them, and I like all kinds of different people. That's the other thing the stellium is telling you. It's like, whatever, I'm interested in almost everybody. There were a few exceptions, but essentially I'm interested in almost everybody. But the moon Jupiter has been incredibly important for me, career-wise, and very evident. I started my career in publishing for many years. I worked in publishing, which would be what an astrologer might say, looking at that is, are you working in publishing? Are you a writer? Is that what you do? And of course, I write a blog, which is, I've been doing it for like 10 years, and there's thousands and thousands of words on there. And I also do my own podcast, and I do videos and I do lectures. So all of that is very, and it's very helpful for that Mercury in Pisces in the 8th, which is a Mercury that is basically studying occult subjects or something that's hidden, or studying psychology. And I have to share that, because it's not enough for me with this chart, or with me personally. I know this just to know stuff. I like to share what I know and synthesize it as well.
Indeed. And you were talking about yourself, being a healer. Of course, this is the archetype of Pisces is being the healer. And you have Chiron in Pisces as well. And I see that it's conjunct Mars. So everything here speaks about healing. So now let's talk a little bit about Psyche and Eros, as this is the subject of the talk that you're giving at the lodge. Well, I think I'm just going to have to let you get on with telling us about Psyche and Eros, because I love that story myself.
Well, should I repeat the story? I mean, most people know the story of Psyche and Eros, but just briefly, it's the love story in the Western canon. And you've heard it retold in many, many different forms. It's, from Cinderella to Sleeping Beauty, it's retold many, many times. And it's the story of a god falling in love with a mortal, Psyche, which also means the soul. And Eros also just means love. It's the story of love and the soul. And it's a very profound story in some ways, because it's, that you can, the resonances with the idea of loving the soul, of loving your own soul, So it's about personal development in some ways. But it's also just what we all have. Many of us have a love story or several love stories in our lives, or many love stories. You see the psyche is very strong. I mean, it's amazing when I started to study psyche, because somebody asked me, actually, because I'd done a lot of stuff on the other asteroids, and I'd sort of skipped psyche because I just thought, oh, I don't know what I thought, but I sort of skipped it. And then I started to look at what psyche was doing in some very obvious charts, like just like the charts of, for example, sort of Barbara Cartland, who wrote all those love stories. It's very strong. And then Jane Austen turned out to be really strong. And then it made me think, actually, that's very curious, because quite often when you look at an asteroid or you look at a planet, you realize that the myth and the planet and the meaning of the planet don't actually fit together completely, right? We'd love to think that, but like a really good example is Neptune, the planet Neptune. Or Uranus, is Uranus more like Prometheus? Is Neptune more like Dionysus? We have to ask ourselves that as astrologers, right? Because it's not always clear cut that it's that the story of the myth that goes with the planet is the same as what the astrology is going to be. However, with psyche, it actually turns out to be they go together really well. So, and it's about the archetypal story. I mean, I'll talk about this more in the lecture, but it's about the archetypal stories that we tell ourselves. So, for example, Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces, has got psyche on his IC, right? The foundation of his chart. What's his foundation is the story. So psyche is about love, the asteroid psyche, but it's also about the storytelling and how our lives become narratives and how we tell stories. And how do we communicate as human beings? We communicate through stories.
Oh, yes. And, I think it's important to always remember that the heart of astrology is story, because it's about the archetypes by which we cast light upon ourselves and are able to see who we are. So this is another dimension, again, when we're talking about psyche. So for people who are not too familiar with the story, could you just give us the short version?
The short version is Psyche is a beautiful princess. And she has two older sisters. This already sounds familiar to people, I think. She has two older sisters. She's a beautiful princess. Her parents are really, like, she's so fantastic that people sort of start to worship her because she's so beautiful. This makes Venus, the goddess of love, jealous. She hears about it in heaven. She hears that there's this human being who people are saying is as beautiful as Venus and is being worshipped. So this makes her very jealous. She wants to stop Psyche. But meanwhile, to cut a very long story short, as you probably know, Venus has a son called Eros. And Eros, actually by accident, shoots him, one of his own arrows penetrates him, and he falls in love with Psyche. So Venus is trying to get rid of her and instead of which her son Eros saves Psyche and takes him to his palace, and this is where, if you know the story of Beauty and the Beast, it's very similar. She wakes up in this palace and there's no one there, but it's a wonderful place, and she's looked after, and she has a beautiful bath, and she's given beautiful clothes. And then at night, someone comes to her and makes wonderful love to her, because this is also about love and sex. it's not just about pure, it's about human love and how humans love. And it's about that kind of love. It's not the love between a mother and child. Okay. It's the love between two people, two equals. We're not equals in this case yet, but don't worry, they get to be equal in the end. Anyway, encouraged by her sisters, she makes the fatal error of lighting a candle or lighting a torch, I can't remember which it is, to see who this fantastic person is making love to her at night. And she's completely dazzled by him because he's this glorious, it's love itself who's making love to the soul at night. So they're having this union at night, but unfortunately, this is breaking a pact that she has with Eros, and she's cast out. And he says, you shouldn't have done that. I told you not to look at me, blah, blah, blah. And then she has to go through a lot of trials and tribulations to win back love. So this is also something that we're very familiar with the best love stories are not, the path of true love does not run smooth. So the best true love, the best love stories always have this problem, that she has many problems to overcome. And of course, Venus is trying to stop her all the time, because not only is she as beautiful as Venus, now she's after her son. So Venus really hates her. And I think that's quite an interesting thing. Like the worst mother-in-law ever is this goddess of beauty who is all powerful, who's decided she hates you. So poor Psyche is humiliated, actually. She goes through various humiliations, and eventually she wins through, and Psyche and Eros are joined together, and she is made a goddess in the end. And that is the point, is that in the end, like Alice in Wonderland becoming the queen, or Alice through the looking glass becoming the queen at the end of the story, she becomes a goddess at the end of the story. And guess what? It's one of the few myths that lives happily ever after. They live happily ever after in Olympus, forever and ever. And this was a story that was retold. It's the central part of the Golden Ass, which is a very famous classical book, essentially. But it's the middle section of it. So it's a story within a story told by an old woman in the story. But it was incredibly influential. As you already know, listening to this, you're thinking, oh, that fairy tale, that fairy tale, that fairy tale, that love story, whatever. It's the most influential love story in, I would say, in Western literature, and repeated many times. And you see it was rediscovered, these things get rediscovered over and over again, but it was very influential on art. So you see it in paintings all the time. Psyche was a very favored subject by artists from the Renaissance on, really.
So if we think about the asteroid and where it's placed in the chart,
yeah,
what significance would it have? What would the themes be, as if people are wanting to look and see where Psyche is in the chart? What would it be significating?
Well, it's interesting, this question, actually, because you immediately think, well, I'm not, I'm not Cinderella or whatever. I haven't had this sort of dramatic love story, but it can show certain things. It can show your attitude to story, and how you create narrative in your life, what narratives are important to you. So these may not always be a love story. It can also show your love life, a really crazy one, which is just so ridiculously apt. For example, are the charts of, it's quite useful in synastry, for example, the charts of Harry and Meghan, right? It's incredible. If you look at their psyches, they're incredible. They're exactly partile, opposite each other in Leo and Aquarius. So his is in Aquarius, right? And hers is in Leo. I think I've got this right. So her love story is like this royal Leo thing. Yeah, his love story is this: I'm going to become a kind of one of the people thing, and that's exactly what happened. And also that they're exactly opposite. So that's quite interesting when you start to look at the psyches of people who are involved, and they are playing out some kind of love story in public, you know, for the rest of us, for the delectation of Daily Mail readers. Poor them, right? Who would want that, to have your love story played out like that? But that's how it's worked out. Um, so it can tell you your love, you know, whatever your love narrative is, which may be one that you have more than once. You know, not everybody has Prince, you know, you might have 5 Prince Charmings in your life, or 2, or none, you know, depending on where it falls. It may not be important for you. So these, you know, this is the thing about asteroids, you know, or any planet, they're not necessarily the most important thing for some people. So it depends where it is in your chart, you know. So, you know, I think, you know, for me, it's in the 10th house. So I'm talking about Psyche. I happen to be doing that, you know. And as you say, I have all that 7th house stuff. So of course I'm interested in the self and the other, which is also what that story of Psyche is about. It's about the soul and the other, but it's a loving other, you know. It's not the scary other. It's not Pluto, you know. It's interesting to me that people seem to be much more interested in the story, for example, of Persephone and um, Hades, Persephone and Pluto, which is a scary story about rape and abduction and becoming queen of the underworld. And that story is often, you know, that's used a lot in astrology. People talk about that a lot, but also, you know, you see that tale retold as well. You know, every time you see one of those, you know, I was going to say the Scandinavian crime dramas that begins with the, you know, the naked body of a girl found outside the village, right? We're seeing some aspect of that Persephone story, right? But we don't retell, you know, we don't focus enough on this Psyche story, which is actually so important to us, because it's a story that has a beautiful ending, you know, because even Venus forgives her. She thinks, oh, well, you know, if I have to have a daughter-in-law, at least it's this one, which is so like real life, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the thing also that's different is that it's really important to keep in mind that Psyche starts life as immortal. You know, she becomes immortal through her search for love. And this is the other thing about our lives and our, you know, how do we become gods? How do we do something great? Well, you know, you might go to the moon or something. But one way that many of us reach some kind of height in our lives is through love, and being able to really give ourselves up to love. And it's a hard thing to do.
It is. And that's the whole thing, is that the route to divinity is through love. So to connect with the divine within us, we have to connect with love. And for Psyche, yes, she went through many ordeals. She had to make sacrifices, but then that was her path to love. And when she found it, then she connected with her divinity. And I think that's the important, one of the many important themes to come from this story. But it is, you're right, it's about divinity, and I think it is about connecting with what's divine within ourselves, which is
And
that
we could carry on. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
it's to do with the purity of love.
Yeah. And this is something that is available to all of us in even the small. You know, we think about these sort of big Hollywood, whatever, these, you know, or famous people doing this and that. All of us have this within us. And that's what's so wonderful about the story of Psyche and love stories. It's, you know, or and they may not be glamorous or dramatic. But the other important thing about Psyche is that she's offered love initially and she doesn't really appreciate it. You know, she's like, oh, this is fantastic. You know, I'm having a wonderful time in this beautiful palace and a great sex life, and the food is delicious, and I'm really, I love this person, but oh, I'm not going to play, but I need to see who it is. I'm not, because she actually thinks that it might be a monster. This is one of the things that her sisters persuade her of. They say, well, how do you know what you're making love to at night? It may be this awful kind of snaky thing. It may be something vile. And that's the other part of the story, is also about jealousy, isn't it? The jealousy of her sisters, and how listening to the wrong people can lead you down the wrong path. And also, this is so human, isn't it? This is also what happens to us when we're setting out on our journey in life, is trying to listen to the right voices. And there's quite a lot in the story of her tribulations about listening. She has to listen to a reed and then, and she has to become discriminating and make better choices. I mean, there are parts of the story that are like Rumpelstiltskin. If you know the story of Rumpelstiltskin, where she has to weave straw into gold, doesn't she, over and over again in that story, and do an impossible task. But by learning to discriminate, which I think is an important word, learning to make choices, she begins to realize and grow up enough to really embrace love when she reaches it. And this is also the story. What's in the story is about becoming an adult. And part of becoming an adult in the world is recognizing love when you see it and cherishing it.
Exactly. And having faith in it. The lack of faith that led her, it was that doubt that led her to have that candle, so she could just, and she didn't have an open conversation in which she said, it's a bit one-sided, this, you can see me, I can't see you. She didn't do that. No, she went and got the candle, and of course that woke him, and so he knew what she had done. And there's so many wonderful lessons in that story, and I'm sure will be wonderful to hear how that applies, what that has to say about us in our charts. So tell us, when is the lecture?
Oh, I think it's November the 8th, at the Lodge in London. So it's the Monday night lecture, at the Lodge in London, in Gloucester. Is it Gloucester Place, isn't it?
This will be on Zoom.
Okay.
Yeah, this will be on Zoom, so it's easy for everyone to access it. And I'll make sure that the link to the lodge is on the description box for this interview, so one can click as quickly as they can and get signed up for this, because it's going to be a great lecture. And if people wanted to get in touch with you, Christina, how could they do that?
My website is the Oxford Astrologer, and just Google that and you will be able to, you can email to admin, but have a look at the website.
Great. That's wonderful, because obviously you also have a podcast that people might like to tune into, so that they can find that through your website as well.
Yeah, and Twitter and Facebook and all the usual social media, blah, blah, blah. I'm on all those as the Oxford Astrologer.
Great, that's wonderful. Christina, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thanks for asking me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for watching. And next week, we're going to be looking at the 7th house again, but in a different light. So until then, goodbye.